All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar on the state of AI in the legal industry. It is a topic that everyone is talking about. My name is Mary O'Carroll. I'm the Chief Community Officer here at Ironclad, and I will be moderating the discussion today. A little bit about me. I've been at Ironclad on the executive team for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I spent most of my career at Google doing legal operations, and prior to that was at a law firm at Orrick with Kate doing legal operations as well. So, been at all parts of the ecosystem, and I'm happy to be joined today by distinguished panelists from, again, all around the ecosystem. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with David, go to Kate, Rennie, and then Milana. So, David, I'd love for you to start.
I'm David Wilkins. I'm a professor at Harvard Law School. I run the Center on the Legal Profession there, but mostly I'm a Mary O'Carroll groupie and do whatever she asks.
Hi,
Thank you,
everyone.
David.
I'm Kate Orr. I'm Global Head of Practice Innovation at Orrick. I lead practice transformation efforts here at Orrick. So think of the trifecta of people, process, and technology that obviously, of course, right now includes a keen focus on AI and generative AI.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Rennie Huang. I'm Deputy General Counsel at OpenAI. We have a few AI products. But more importantly, I spent 13 years at Google with Mary O'Carroll.
All the Mary connections. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Mary. My name is Milana McCullough, and I lead the legal team over at Reddit. I'm hoping most of you guys know Reddit. It's a network of communities where people can dive into their interests, hobbies, and passions.
Amazing. Thank you all. So I intentionally curated this panel of superstars from all over the legal industry, academia, in-house law firms, because we are in such an unprecedented time in the legal world with AI-driven transformation happening to all of us in different ways. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime paradigm shift that we're experiencing in how all of us work. We at Ironclad, we are certainly committed to bringing it to all of our customers, but we want to make sure that we do it in a way that truly honors the reality of the broader industry. And so to that end, we have commissioned a independent study, which if you saw the short video, of 800 practitioners from across law firms and in-house teams on how they see AI. We'll chat through some of those findings with this group today, but in short, I don't think any of us were surprised by the results. So we will dive right in. I think what everybody wants to know right now is what people are actually doing with AI. There are very, very high expectations, in my opinion, but also a lot of skepticism about the capabilities that it can offer. Everywhere I turn, it seems like people are asking, what are those real use cases? What are people actually doing that is working for them in the legal space? So some of the key findings that we had in our report were that 71% of legal professionals trust AI. But at the same time, there's going to be differences that we see in adoption, both at law firms and in-house teams. So let's kick off the discussion with you, Kate, since you're at Orrick, a law firm. What are you seeing at the law firm side? What's been your approach, and what are you guys doing?
So our approach right now is really, I'd say, one of growth. We're really focused on taking a hands-on approach now to grow with the technology. And I think we all know that the technology is early. It's changing and improving at an amazing pace every day. There's different and more. And we don't want to wait for some point in time in the future to lean in. So we want our lawyers and legal professionals now using the technology and growing with it. I have a colleague who has a brilliant way of articulating it is we don't want to find ourselves going from a flip phone to an iPhone 15. We want to be ready for the iPhone 15 when it is here. So that means that within Orrick, we're experimenting with many tools and solutions in the market. We're trying tools, we're using tools. This includes wholly new tools and also features that are being built into the tools we already have in our toolkit. And I think we're increasingly seeing that the tools we all use on a daily basis are adding in generative AI functionality. We're working with our lawyers to identify the use cases in their practices. And then on top of that, building our own solutions where it makes sense to do so. So for instance, we built a chat tool like ChatGPT that our lawyers can use in our environment comfortably, knowing that what they're putting into it isn't going out and being used to train the internet of things. All of this testing and use both on the legal practice side and on the operation side, is done within the bounds of the comfort of our clients. And we
Mm-hmm.
have clients that have different expectations and requirements and ways they do or do not want us to be using the technology. But really, we're focused on using and integrating the technology into our workflows and building that digital fluency of our team now to grow with it over time.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting is that clients are pushing law firms, which is why you and so many other law firms are doing so much experimentation and trying things out. Clients are asking, what are the firms doing? And at the same time, we're also hearing clients push back and say, please don't use AI, right? So we're seeing a lot of both sides of every story when it comes to the AI journey. Milana and Rennie, from the in-house teams, what are your feelings? What are your perspectives on both what you guys are doing with your legal teams, but also with your law firms?
I can go first. So let me take it a bit more high level, and I can talk about what we're doing more generally at the company with AI, and then talk a little bit what we're doing at legal. So just more generally, Reddit is exploring how to best bring AI features to our Redditors mods. So a really great use case, which I think is interesting for this audience, is for AI, is for moderation tools, where the tool can actually suggest actions a moderator can take to accept that they can either quickly accept or reject, making moderation easier. Basically a helper for mods. And another one we're experimenting with in one of our bigger communities is a feature called post guidance that helps users compose posts that fit those particular rules. And the main theme for us here is human augmentation, right? Where AI is helping to make a process more efficient, but the ultimate decision maker, whether it's the moderator or the user, is still always the human. And then going on to the legal team, we're still very much in the early stages of figuring out how to use AI. Two areas of interest for us is one on the commercial side. So we've been especially interested in how it can up level and make our contracting more efficient. For instance, identifying key contractual clauses as we import old contracts into a new contracts management system, and really giving us customized intelligence about our past deals. And then another area that we're very early on in, which is really interesting, is DMCA notices. So this is Digital Millennium Copyright Act notices, where rights holders can ask us to take down their content. So this is really structured content, since the DMCA requirements are explicit, and we're looking at using AI to make the review process faster. But again, the theme here is human augmentation to help us be more efficient, and where the ultimate decision maker is still the legal team.
And I would just add, obviously at OpenAI, we have a slightly different or perspective or posture, right, with the use of our products internally. But I think very much echoing themes from Milana in terms of, there are just so many different use cases that can help improve our work, make us more efficient, more productive, right? I'd actually take it, back a step too, and kind of two thoughts. One is, I feel we're still in the very early stages of AI. It's exciting. We're all talking about it, but we're still figuring it out, and figuring out how we can apply it, all the different use cases. And honestly, every day I'm surprised by all the different areas, whether it's summarizing content or reviewing contracts or helping develop responses. Like we just everyday lives, we find this exciting, interesting use case, and that's pretty cool. And and in some ways, I actually like talking more about not what we do internally, but what's our partners and customers do. So for example, Ironclad, for example, has a great product, AI Assist, right? And it allows you to do legal review on contracts, review them, has pre-approved language and guidelines, right? And all this integrated playbook, and you can just see how just integrating these things in your workflow. And to Milana's point, this is not a replacement, but augmentation, right? Like, how do we make our lives easier and better? And you just find all these productivity gains, and just and new outcomes are quite amazing.
And then, David, I'd love your perspective. In your role, you obviously see what's happening in the schools, but you have a much broader role where you see what's happening across the ecosystem. So your thoughts on what you're seeing?
So to start with law schools, that's easy, because law schools, roughly speaking, have been in the Stone Age, I don't know, for 200 or 300 years, since Christopher Columbus Langdell, when it comes to thinking about technology and innovation. There's certainly individual faculty who are doing interesting things, but at an institutional level, mostly people are either unaware of exactly how much is going on, although all the publicity is changing that, or hoping that it'll sort of all go away, or in pure terror. So
Yeah.
I'd say the law schools, not surprisingly, are trying to understand what this means for them, but are very much at the rudimentary stages. And that's partly because, as everybody has said here, if you're looking out in the world, so at the Center on the Legal Profession, not surprisingly, we've been spending tons and tons and tons of time looking at this. And, there's every reaction you can imagine in the world, right? There's oh my God, the robots are coming, the robots are coming. And, we're all just taking the blue pill. If you're a Matrix fan, you know what that means. Or many of my students, to quote the old rock and roll song, say it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Meaning, no more 50 state surveys, no more document review. Maybe it's going to make my life much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. But then there's a lot of people who are with Yogi Berra. It's deja vu all over again. How long have we been told that technology is going to revolutionize, transform the legal profession? So I think we see all of these reactions going on, and we see everybody doing everything from the 25% who are banning everyone from using it, which, by the way, they're still using it, I would assume,
Mm-hmm.
to the kind of utopian idea that it's going to get rid of all the work we don't want without eliminating a single job. So, I mean, there are all of these wonderful titles like AI Assist and Helper and Copilot.
Yep.
But, McKinsey did say it could eliminate 300 to 400 million jobs worldwide. Knowledge workers are the most likely ones who it's going to come for. And even if they're off by a factor of 10, that's still a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
So I agree that the real questions or issues are in how to work with AI. There's no question that lawyers who know how to use AI will quickly replace lawyers who do not.
Right.
But I think we are just at the beginning phases of understanding what this is going to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, my sort of assessment of where we are as an industry is even the most advanced groups, teams, firms, you name it, are still in the very much experimentation, trying things out. I don't think anyone can honestly say they've started to work completely differently or delivering legal services differently yet. I do believe it is going to really transform the way we work, and how fast that happens is anyone's guess. And David, you've heard me say things are happening both fast and slow at the same time, and how can that be? But that is really how it feels. Milana, when we got together and chatted to prep for this, when Kate was talking about some of the pushback the firms are getting from their clients, you had said, I'm going to pick on you. So you had said, hey, yeah, I actually definitely want to know where my firm is leveraging AI. And I'm curious, what is your perspective on that? And where is that coming from?
Yeah. So I think I'm not sure, as I said yesterday, I'm not sure yet how I feel about our outside counsel using it. For Reddit, the majority of our use of outside counsel right now is for strategic legal guidance or drafting briefs. And we're paying the big bucks, right, for our counsel's dedication, guidance, and time. And I could see the value for large document review projects, but we're still pretty small and haven't needed that kind of large scale support yet, knock on wood. Mm-hmm. So I think, I definitely want to talk to the outside counsel. If our outside counsel was proposing using it, I wanted to understand it better, understand how it affects our billing. I think that would be key as well.
Yeah.
But I think I'm a little bit still on the fence there.
I mean, that's the big question is how is it going to be used? What happens to the data? What happens to the billing, the billable hour? All those are kind of the big professional development questions that we still have to unravel as this transformation takes place. I am often reminded of, 5 to 10 years ago when we were talking about the cloud, and I sat in a room with financial services clients and law firms, and the law firm said, it's not us. The clients refuse, will not allow us to put any of their data in the cloud. And of course, where are we now as everyone's scrambling and putting everything in the cloud. Do you all kind of feel that that's a good analogy? Is that where we're going, where there's a lot of just uncertainty and waiting and seeing right now, but it's going to really change?
I think that there is an analogy there, but I do think it will likely take us longer here and be more complex. I mean, I think the instinct is right that right now it feels similar to that cloud experience because there's a lack of information or just a lot of questions. Sometimes people don't even know what questions to ask. They just know that they need to ask about their data. So there are similarities there, though I do think it may take longer and be a bit more complex. I mean, from our perspective, we disclose the fact that we have AI technology and we use AI technology in our engagement letters. And then the process, recently and over time is like we may receive outside counsel guidelines or other guidelines from our clients relating to our use of the tech, which then leads us to have a conversation to talk about what kinds of tools we're using, how we're using them, and then the security within that technology and our robust process for vetting that security. And oftentimes just having those conversations helps. It answers the questions for our clients, like how we're using the technology. I mean, ultimately, like I said, we work within the bounds of our clients, full stop. But I can say that we're spending a tremendous amount of time on this right now as compared to 3 years ago, for instance. Mm-hmm. So we have an AI counsel like myself, someone from our GC's office, our chief technology officer, our chief digital officer, and we're constantly kind of talking about these issues and these ethical issues on a regular basis. I mean, one interesting observation I'm picking up on what Milana said is, as this technology becomes more in the forefront, there is a good argument that the ethical obligations with respect to cost includes using technology to manage costs. And so there will be a point in time where our obligations as outside counsel may butt up against our clients' expectations or wishes with respect to the tech we are or aren't using. So there's just a lot of open issues now that we're all sort of thinking about and grappling with in real time.
Yeah, one thing that I found interesting in the B2B market is outside of legal, there's some really amazing use cases. I advise a small stealth startup in the AI and marketing space, and they use AI to create B2B marketing campaigns using a company's own data. And it's absolutely amazing the work they're doing and how that really can transform the industry. My sense on legal and outside counsel, it's not as much a volume. It depends on the type of legal advice you're getting from your outside counsel. But if you're primarily getting knowledge, right, and that strategic legal guidance, that it may not be quite as AI might not be quite as effective at that, at least right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Than not.
I think though that's where it's going to get even better, and that's where it's going to become really interesting. So AI not just as a tool to make us more efficient or reduce costs, but a tool to allow us to glean or deliver insights that we never could have before because we were restrained by time or resources. Like suddenly we can look at a tremendous amount of data and pull out new insights. That to me is the most exciting.
So I think this, Mary, goes to one of the comments in the little video you played at the beginning, which is, AI is a lot of different things. So if, to Kate's point, law is going to become a more data-driven, metrics-driven field, right? If we did a big survey of global CEOs a couple of years ago with EY Legal, and the number one thing CEOs want is a more data-driven approach to risk. And lawyers are going to have to live in the world of data. And that involves a whole range of transformations in the legal profession, particularly in the corporate legal profession. That's number one. Number two, the difference between what's happening in law and what's happening in the rest of the real world is undoubtedly going to shrink.
Mm-hmm.
Lawyers always think that what we do is different and special, and of course it is in some ways. But one of the big trends reshaping the entire world is what I've often called the blurring together of traditional categories of organization and thought. And so, in other words, the difference between law, finance, marketing, accounting, strategic planning, geopolitical risk, all of these things are increasingly intertwined, which means that tools that are used in one place are going to be used in the other. The technologies themselves, and here I defer to Reddy, although he probably won't tell us all the cool things he's got up his sleeve, uh, are undoubtedly going to increase in their abilities. That's what Kate just said. But there's always going to be a complex and moving parameter between what things the technologies are really good at and what things that humans are really good at. And this is a moving frontier. In fact, there's a great paper I've been teaching from some people at Harvard Business School called The Jagged Edge, which is exactly looking at what's the edge of technology versus humans. And the thing is, it's moving in both dimensions. That is, the technology is moving and the humans are moving, both in the sense of their ability to use technology and also in their reaction to technology. So these things are all happening now, and they're happening, as Barry, you said, what is it? It happens much slower than predicted and faster than expected. And so we're at this point in which there is clearly an important change going on, but we're still at the process of trying to figure out what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree. Yes, there are a lot of cool things happening, and there's also a lot of uncertainty, right? And honestly, we'll spend the next few years or more sorting that out. I do think AI will unlock a lot of opportunity and ultimately change the way we work. Ideally for the better. And we'll just see new use cases. We develop foundational models, but we have all these customers build applications on top of them, right? And it's an amazing economy that's driven out there, and we'll see different use cases and different ways people use it well. And I think to David's point, um, in some ways, the legal industry is no different from every other industry that's being advanced by the technology, right? I do think for lawyers, we're generally more conservative, right, and maybe a little risk adverse to adopt new change. And we also have an additional stakeholder with courts, right? For example, who may have different rules on how AI may be used. But even then, to that extent, I think everyone's moving really fast. I was on a panel a few weeks ago with the judicial conference of judges, right? And they're already thinking about how to use AI, what the appropriate process is, how AI can actually increase access to justice, right? How they can use it in their systems, right? As well as how it should be used in their courts or within litigation. So it's a fast moving field. We'll have rules of the road. They'll change, but I think we'll adapt like we do with any other technology.
Yeah, one of the stat that I read out at the beginning was 71% of legal trusts AI, and I think trust is kind of that word that keeps coming up when we talk about adoption and use cases and whether or not we're allowed to use the AI. What do you think is, I guess, is that surprising as a number to you? And then what do you think it is about the AI that people are nervous about or comfortable with?
I can jump on this one. So I think trust is actually super important, right? It's actually a very nuanced and complex. I'm actually a little bit surprised at that number, because but I think maybe it's a testament to lawyers, right? But a lot of trust, I think, comes from just understanding and awareness, right? How the AI works, and not if it's too much of a black box. How do you trust it, right? And so I think fundamentally there is that baseline. There's just not enough education of awareness of what AI can and can't do, and how you can apply it, and that kind of leads to a level of misgiving, which I think is really addressed by just a better understanding, educating, understanding what the tools can do. I think when you break trust down to specific inquiries, there could be things like trust around privacy, right? Or trust around security. And those are very distinct issues, which honestly aren't new to any technology, right? Privacy, how you use your data, transparency, disclosures. Absolutely. You look at any of these products out there, they will address that. And you take a look at the product and you see if those disclosures make sense to you or negotiate others, right? And likewise with security. A lot of the enterprise AI products out there are SOC compliant. They're audited, and so these are things that we've done before for other technologies, and they apply to AI just as much.
I totally agree with that because that comes up all the time. And I've said the way you're evaluating your existing software providers for security and data should be the same. I mean, it's just a different type of technology. Sorry, Milana, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, I don't think that number doesn't surprise me. I think it's right about where I think we should be right now. I think the point, the trust but verify, right? Thought and it really depends if the task is about, again, human augmentation or is it about replacement, right? And that is the key. On the placement side, I think the thing that we're worried about, which would everyone's worried about, is hallucinations, right? You see the examples of wrong output all the time. For instance, the meme from 2 months ago or so, the glue on pizza to keep cheese sliding off meme that was going around, right? So that's the word, right? Is that it takes data from who knows where and summarize it in the wrong way or gets the context wrong, right? That's the concern, right? Especially if you're talking about tasks that are more replacement, like summaries or pulling versus augmenting and making things where the human is still is making the actual decision at the end.
Yeah.
So I'd say,
I think the trust also, obviously.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that the trust also necessarily depends on the task we're asking the technology to do. Picking up on the trust but verify point, I'm frequently asked, well, if I have to verify this, like, why is it so great? How is it saving me time? How is it making me more efficient? If I have to just check all of the work, why should I use this? And I always talk about our work as a pyramid. And the most sophisticated work that we're doing is at the top of the pyramid, delivering that nuanced business advice to our clients. And this is not where we should be looking right now to leverage this technology. It may get there over time or certainly get closer to it. But it's the task down here where you can quickly use the technology and look at the output and quickly determine whether or not it can be trusted, that you can quickly verify. That 71% of people that trust AI, I suspect, are thinking of the tasks down here, which makes sense. That's where the technology is as well.
So I think as to the number, I'm not quite sure what it means, a word like trusted, as others have said. But I'd say what's been said raises three concerns. One is that what are we comparing it to? Mm-hmm. So, as I said actually in our prep meeting, a certain person, Mary, well, once said to me that no one will use our product unless it's 98% or 96% reliable. And this is a kind of a contract finding data analytics thing. And I said, oh, really? Did anybody ever test the reliability of bleary-eyed associates reading through boxes of contracts in windowless warehouses in Phoenix, Arizona in August? Answer, no. So that there's a kind of comparison to a perfect human, which we know doesn't exist. So that's the first thing. How much do we trust what we're actually doing now? And in the study that the paper I alluded to before, they did a random controlled experiment with BCG associates using AI or not using AI. And they found that the ones who were not using AI were scoring like a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, so in other words, don't assume that the humans are perfect. Second point is our ability to eyeball something and say that doesn't look right or that looks right to me depends on the people eyeballing having been trained in what's right and what's not right. So part of the question we're now having to ask ourselves is, if the more basic rudimentary tasks are now not being done by humans anymore, but are being done by AI, then how good will the people who are then checking it or eyeballing it be at being able to do that? And the danger here is not lack of trust, it's too much trust. As I think we trust now, it doesn't surprise me that 71% of people, they trust their GPS to find the right direction. But
Right.
they have no idea whether the GPS is actually doing it. And when they get lost through the GPS, they don't know how to read a map because they've never had to read a map before. So that's another level of trust. And then the last piece, I think, goes to what is it that we are actually trying to do better and trying to preserve? And if what we're trying to preserve is high level judgment, where does high level judgment come from? And what is it that people need to be trained in order to do high level judgment? We used to have a very discrete way of thinking about how to train people to do that, which was
Mm-hmm.
years and years of torture, doing meaningless tasks, moving up the chain of command, and seeing bigger picture. What happens to those apprenticeship models in this world?
Oh gosh, so many good comments that I could take this in so many different directions right now. But one comment, just to go back on the trust and the hallucinations, uh, it does feel to me that the use cases, the practical, like things that people are actually doing with AI today in legal, have a lot to do with the chances of hallucinations. Of course, we've heard the horror stories of, people getting in trouble for relying on it. But if you're, and Rennie, you've mentioned working with contracts and commercial work from Milana. That is probably because the likelihood of hallucination when you're drafting, redlining contracts, summarizing a contract, is going to be a lot less than if you're just asking, "Hey, what's the laws about X, Y, Z, and is there any precedent to some sort of tool?" So, does that factor in? Are you guys seeing that in, people are gravitating towards the AI that is more accurate, reliable? Rennie, I don't know what the right word is, in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know what the right word is either, but if AI gravitating to use cases where it's more easily understood or applicable, right? Where it's clearly like
Mm-hmm.
a efficiency or productivity gain, right? Instead of having a first year associate read 1,000 documents and summarize them, can ChatGPT do it much quicker or not, right? So that's just simpler to follow, understand, and those are easy wins, right?
Yeah.
So you'll see. But to Evan's point, like you don't have a first year associate write a memo and then you just don't review it, right?
Exactly.
Everything has some layer of strategic review on top, so it doesn't necessarily change that kind of workflow or how we think about our work. We're just making it more efficient, right? I do think though we'll start to see more interesting applications, but it'll take more time. So there's actually an appellate circuit opinion, I think it was on the Seventh Circuit, I think, where a judge in his concurrence actually used ChatGPT to define the ordinary meaning of a word, right? And that's novel, right? And the question is, will you start using AI to do things like that? Because how different, like, I'll put it this way, like, what's the delta between going to a dictionary and looking up the meaning of a word, where like we don't know actually who wrote the dictionary, right?
Totally.
Versus going to LLM that has theoretically read the internet and come up with definitions and provides an answer, right? And so whether AI can be an additional data point or additional tool to inform more strategic legal kind of processes that we wouldn't have thought of before, I think that's something that we'll look forward to.
I think it'd be interesting there to see what the difference is between just doing a general Google search for that definition versus using an LLM. I think, Mary, in terms of your question, I think the easier applications, right, are definitely, where there's volume, right, and where you can be more efficient. So, for example, like the number one that I can think of and the one that we're thinking through, as I mentioned, is on the contract side or contract analysis or pulling out terms or analyzing red lines, like that type of work, is the one that we're particularly interested in. And then things like making us more efficient, like on the DMCA example. So for a platform where we get a large amount of DMCA removal requests, like trying to figure out how we can be more efficient using AI for that. That's something that we're really excited about. So again, we're still very, very early stage, and I don't think we've quite at the stage where we're seeing ROI on our efforts, but I think that'll come really soon.
David, the other thread I wanted to pull on was you're mentioning, how will we train the lawyers of the future? And God, if that is not the most common question that I get every time we talk about AI and what it can do, if we don't have lawyers sitting in dark rooms going through boxes of documents, how will they ever learn? And of course, I have very strong thoughts on this, but I'm curious, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, again, did anybody ever actually test the theory that you needed to spend 6.5 years at a windowless warehouse going through documents in order to recognize privilege? There are, I think I told you guys the example when I came back to teach in 1986, which shows you how old I am. The law school prohibited law students from using Westlaw and Lexis. Because how could you ever learn how to do legal research without doing shepherds? Anybody know what that is? It's not tending a flock with sheep. Here's a hint. Okay. So on the other hand, we do know that apprenticeship models are important, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the challenge and the excitement of the today is that it gives us an opportunity to re-examine what it is we thought was important and valuable, and to actually try to justify it, not because it's what we always did, but what is the value of sitting in an office together? What is the value of having to go back to first principles on something? What is the value of having to look at a stack of documents you don't know what's in there and try to find it? Mm-hmm. My guess is there's absolutely value in all those things. My also strong feeling is you do not have to do it for 5 years in order to get the value. Right. It's just like thinking like a lawyer. I think there's a lot of value in the first year of legal education, the Socratic method, reading cases, but you do not have to do the same thing for 3 years. I think we could actually be training people in how do you evaluate data? What are no one can teach you how large language models work at the moment, because actually even Rennie will agree no one actually knows how they work at the moment, other than to say it predicts the next word. Okay, I can say that. But I don't think people need to know how they work in any intimate detail, but they do need to know where are the common mistakes it makes, or how to recognize when something's more likely to hallucinate. This is partly Oric, I'll call you guys out. You and Mitch are trying to teach associates how to do prompt engineering. Why? Because it turns out how you ask the question actually affects what kind of answer you get, or how different models respond to different kinds of problems, or what kinds of problems, what aspects of problems are more amenable to these sorts of tools and how to use them. The one thing I'll just push back a little bit is we love pyramids. I love pyramids. We always draw everything we do in the shape of a pyramid. And we think that top part is the only part we want to live in. But every piece of work that's in the top part of the pyramid actually has work at all layers of the pyramid. And the question of how to disaggregate work is an incredibly complex one that we are only just beginning to think about, and at the moment, no offense to anyone, is being driven mostly by what we can bill for, as opposed to where the actual optimum way of work being done is. And this is the challenge and the opportunity I think we now face.
Yeah, very well said, David. Yesterday, it just reminds me, I had a really interesting conversation with someone just about what does transformation mean, and how is that different from the word change? And I think in our space, there's a lot of people who are thinking about incremental change and where can we leverage AI to kind of make some changes in our day-to-day life. But what we're missing is that we are undergoing a massive transformation, meaning what this all is going to look like in the future in terms of how we train, what that pyramid looks like, what work we do every day, how do we interact with clients and law firms is going to be completely unrecognizable. And I believe there's going to be there's a lot of fear of, what will this do to my job and will it take away my job? I think we want to work at that top of the pyramid and that will help. But I also think there's going to be an emergence of new roles, which we've already seen in recent years in legal departments and at law firms because of the AI that is disrupting things. Are you guys seeing new roles and any thoughts on, what the structure of a department, of a team, of a law firm will look like in the future?
I mean, I think that we've seen a lot of new roles, not just recently, but over the last 10 to 15 years. So
Yeah.
certainly, more technologists, analysts, statisticians, picking up on David's point about the importance of data, like people
Mm-hmm.
allowing us to derive those insights. I also, in addition to sort of the new roles on the technical side and folks that can serve as a bridge between the purely technical side and the lawyers, there also is really a keen need for new skills within the lawyers. And David mentioned the prompt engineering training. I mean, I actually think prompting over time is going to become less important. I think the technology is going to help us prompt in a better way. One of the real values I see in the prompt engineering training now is not just using a good prompt now to get good output, but it forces people to really learn what the technology is meant to do and how to use it. It's not meant to answer yes no questions, for instance. So having to go through the exercise of learning how to prompt actually helps teach you how to use the technology. One skill that I think is so important, and it's what I spend a lot of time thinking about and sort of working on from a change management perspective, is this skill that we all need to have of identifying the use cases. Rennie touched on this. Historically, 5 years ago, you would have an idea for a use case, you find the data, build the model, have the automation. But now we have the data. We have the internet. We have the data, we have the model, and suddenly we're like, okay, how do we use this? And I say this as a lawyer and someone that litigated and practiced for many years. Lawyers are not always the most creative in thinking about how to do things differently or how might I apply this technology. And we need that creativity. I mean, I can tell you, okay, here's 5 ways you can use ChatGPT right now. But the real magic is how else you can think of to use it in your work, in your practice. And that's a skill, whether in lawyers or in new roles, that I think is going to become increasingly valuable. That creativity and willingness to try and fail. Another thing
Mm-hmm.
that lawyers aren't notoriously good at, thanks to the Socratic method. You never wanted to have the wrong answer when you were, stood up in class.
Yeah, on the Reddit legal team, like we tend to hire folks who are more risk forward, right? Who want to be operate in the gray. And we don't have any AI specific lawyers. My expectation is that all of our lawyers, especially on the product counsel side, have a good understanding and really can counsel in these areas as needed. So, when we are launching new features for users or moderators or advertisers in this area, we all understand at least as much as we can about the law and the latest legislation coming through. But I think, for us, like when I think about AI specifically, again, it's going to those areas where we really have volume, right? And that is where I think it's really going to change things up for us. So I mentioned commercial earlier, and discovery as well. I think where there's really structured content, and there's a need for tooling, I think that is where I think we're really going to see a lot of transformation.
I'm getting a question from the audience really about real world applications in AI for the law. Do you guys have more practical or specific examples of what you're seeing in terms of lawyers or legal teams using AI?
Well, I gave the example, like the DMCA example. I think that was a one, right? And then on the commercial side is one, and then on uh, definitely I can see on the discovery side. And I'd love to get Kate's thoughts here. What tooling or what specifically you guys are providing to clients there?
So yeah, I would say that the real use cases right now is if you think about generative AI as an accelerant. And so anywhere that you can imagine accelerating your work. So legal research, for instance, the leading legal research tools have added generative AI functionality into their tools. It just accelerates getting that rough answer. It gets you to the start faster. Then you dig in, you apply the nuance, you look at the case law, you identify how the case does or doesn't apply. It accelerates it. Similarly, one use case that we certainly see a lot of interest in and people actually using is sort of when you think about the document Q&A functionality. The ability to put a document into a chat tool, for instance, and query it or query multiple documents, making comparisons across 3 contracts or pulling out particular issues across the contracts into a summarized list. Again, a human could have done that. It's just accelerating it faster. The way that I use generative AI most frequently right now is what I would describe as ideation. So it's something I could do. I could sit down and take 20 minutes to create an outline of the topics for a deposition, for instance, or create an outline for a presentation. Using the tool to create the rough draft, just to accelerate you adding on the nuances faster. Any of those acceleration opportunities is where we're seeing use cases now. And as I said at the start, it's not that we're seeing that you need to go out and buy new tools that do these things. It's this functionality being added into existing tools, being added into Ironclad, into DraftWise, into the e-discovery platform. So you can now query your entire document production to create, for instance, a timeline in minutes. An associate could have done that. It's just accelerating the creation of that timeline that you're then, verifying and building upon.
Yeah, for this question for myself, I spend so much of my time talking to people about this exact question and what they're using. And the use cases are so broad. I think it's exactly as Kate says, almost everything that people are doing throughout their day in legal services delivery, they are able to accelerate or leverage or think about where they can leverage AI to do that. So it really is in all practices and in all parts. Where I think you could really unleash the power and the creativity is honestly with associates or junior attorneys. Whenever you get something in front of them, they won't even stop talking. All the juices start flowing about all the ideas that they can have about how they could use it day to day. So my, goal I would love to see is getting tools into the hands where they're able to run free. Now, another question we've received, which I think goes hand in hand with this, is how are we seeing AI policies change? And we touched on it a little bit, but I do think that is one of the things that are holding people back from being able to really experiment and try things and see what it could do to really change the way people work. But the AI policies are in the way, and oftentimes rightly so. So thoughts on, have we started to see those rigid policies change a bit, or are we still not yet? Anyone?
I mean, I think when you're talking about internal, vendor using new vendor technology, I don't think I read it. We're fairly strict. We have fairly high standards, so we have done a fairly significant review process for what we're using internally. But that goes for any tooling, right? It's not specific to AI. So I haven't seen any changes. Rennie, curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, we're obviously in a different place, right? I think we're using the technology open to that, and we embrace our partners and vendors who use AI to augment what we do, right? I think from a policy perspective, if I understand correctly, I think it's really you can kind of create your own policies, right? Like if you understand if you're just very clear and upfront how the tool can be used, and what use cases and things like, security around the training data or the fine tuning data, or like, where your model is sitting on site, on premise, or whatnot, right? All those things I think are policy driven things that can address whatever risk or concern you have around those, and you see that popping up all over the place, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hear all the time, well, we have this tool, but we're not allowed to upload documents into it. And, don't your documents already live in all sorts of different, cloud repositories?
Exactly. And I think that's not an AI problem per se. Like, that's a cloud
Ex-
problem. That's a technology problem. That's just, that's something we've dealt with before. It just seems a little bit scarier maybe because it's AI. We don't fully understand. You may not understand where the model sits or what the model actually does with data after it learns from it, right? But again, I think all that comes with transparency education, and then you can create policies around that it'll be no different than many of the other technologies we already use, right?
Look, the legal profession has already been said. Listen, I mean, in our profession, you cannot say anything new until you definitively prove someone said it before. That's called precedent. That's not exactly a forward-looking growth mindset. I think, Mary, you talked about cloud computing. Um, there's no question that people are going to be using it. So the first premise cannot be people are not going to use it. Stanford did some study right after GPT-4 came out in a year ago in, I don't know, April. They asked high school students, how many of you are already using it to do your homework? And 80%, in an anonymous survey said yes. And then one of my students put their hand up and said, that's because the other 20% knew it wasn't really anonymous. Okay.
Exactly.
So, in other words, you have to think about how are we going to use this for what, and convince people what it's good for and what it's not good for.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to pick up on two things you said, Mary, I taught the first thing I ever taught on technology of the law was back in 2000. There was nobody doing it in law. There was not even anybody in the business schools. I had to go to MIT and find somebody who was studying the effect of CAD CAM, computer aided design, computer aided manufacture, on the architecture and engineering profession. And he walked into the class, and the very first thing he said was, professionals always think that technology allows them to do what they already do cheaper and faster. But in fact, what technology does is it redefines what it means to be a professional. So, before CAD CAM, to be an architect was to think in two-dimensional space and draw straight lines. Nobody draws straight lines anymore. Look at Frank Gehry. And you better be able to think in computer-driven three-dimensional space if you're going to be an architect, which fundamentally transformed the architecture profession from the people who ran every construction project in the world to mostly design to build to design, which means architecture and engineering, except at the very elite end, has been absorbed into other businesses. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to us totally, but if we don't start thinking about transformation and about what the transformative potential is, but then here's the other part from the other dimension, which is you talked about trust. I'm worried at some level that people become too trustful of what it is the technology not just does, but what it means. My son goes to Northeastern University. The president wrote this great book like 10 years ago. His name is Joseph Aoun, called Robot Proof Education. And the line he had in there was, I'm not worried about machines thinking like humans. I'm worried about humans thinking like machines. And I think in lawyering in particular, what is it that is essential to the human task of lawyering? And how do we preserve and enhance that through technology, but also protect it from technology? I think is where we need to start investing our time thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a few more minutes. Any final thoughts on kind of what you all are seeing out there in the space or what you are doing in your organizations?
I saw a couple of questions in the chat about AI lawyer. I personally think we're still a long way off from that. I think you're definitely going to get, smaller startups, who might consider instead of a GC to figure out if they can just use Chat GPT instead of that. But I mean, the way I would think about it is that's very similar to just using, those templatized agreements that you can find online versus hiring an actual lawyer. But I think we're still again, I think the use cases and commercial discovery, right? Or I saw another someone else mentioned in privacy or privacy operations as well. I think those where there's a lot of volume and structured content, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of transformation. But I'm not about to replace any of the lawyers on my team yet.
Yeah, and I think David made a good point. We haven't seen the end of architects. We haven't seen the end of accountants with software. We haven't seen the end of, any of these types of professions that have really been enhanced. And honestly, they are able to work in that top of the triangle a lot more than they were, before they
But
were
Mary,
disrupted.
there's a lot fewer bookkeepers, accountants. I mean, I think I think we have to be very clear on maybe three things. One is that people say there are as many jobs or more jobs produced by technological innovation always, but those jobs are different.
Different
And the
jobs,
people
absolutely.
who are currently in the jobs are not necessarily the people who were in the jobs before. And how are we training and developing people for those jobs? That's the first thing. The second thing is to think about how are we going to prepare people for what this new future is. I think in the short term, by the way, AI is going to be a welfare act for lawyers because everything is going to be sued, everything is going to be regulated. You see it all the time. It's going to be an enormous explosion in legal work. Every law firm is starting an AI practice. It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as saying that the practice or profession that we have today is the one that's going to actually be the one that exists in this new environment, or should it be? But the question is, what should we keep and what should we not?
Yeah. Oh, so well said. That's exactly right. I think that's a great note to end on. So I want to thank all of you for your valuable insights and takeaways. David, Rennie, Kate, Milana, you're four of my favorite people in the world. So thank you for your time. While I still have everyone, please keep an eye out for our next virtual event from Ironclad on July 18th, where we're going to be showcasing some of the best of Ironclad summer product releases with live demos. And be sure, of course, to join the Ironclad community. We will also be sending out this recording within the next 24 hours. So if you've missed it or want to rewatch it, you can do that in the comfort of your own home. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
Mary.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mary.